Hello everyone, Mr. Nobody here, and today I'm bringing you a book review. Well, not so much a book review, it's almost more like an author review because I've got a bunch of his books. So today I want to talk about Gareth Hinds and his series of graphic novels based on classical literature. And first off, let me just show you the ones that I've got. I've got Romeo and Juliet, Beowulf, the Iliad, the Odyssey, Edgar Allan Poe collection, Gifts of the Gods, and Macbeth. And I think there's some others. I don't have the Merchant of Venice. I'll probably get that sometime soon. But I wanted to talk about these books. If you're not familiar with them, I mean, obviously these stories, these are very well-known stories. He's got multiple Shakespeare plays. We've got some great Greek mythology in here. We've got some poetry. One that is sort of the odd one out is Gifts of the Gods. This is a fun book. They actually even looked at this book in one of my daughter's classes. And this is actually just a book about words. And it's got the list of the words here. And it's just the stories behind these words. These are ordinary words that are part of, part of our language today, like tantalize, victory, fury, fate, echo, genius, hypnotize, nemesis. And it just says, well, what's the story behind that? Here's Hypnos, the god of sleep. Let's see, we got Fortuna, we got the Fates, Echo. It's got the stories behind those words, and it's fun. It brings it to life when you have a chance to hear it, why we have those words. And then, of course, as I said, this one's also a little different. It's a book of some stories, some poems by Poe. So I'm going to do a little bit of a brief review of each of these. Like I said, this one, short, simple, fun, but kind of for people who are word nerds, this is the shortest one, but it's good. And I love the art in these. And in general, here's something I have to say. This guy puts in the work. He really wants to try and bring you the original literature in a way that is still going to carry its impact and the impact of the language. He actually puts in the effort to go through and look at multiple different translations for works that aren't in English to see, well, which is the best one? Maybe I'll pick some of this here, maybe some of this here. I want to really keep this passage intact. I want this to come through because this is one of the really key ones. So first, let's talk about Poe. Now, this does have some of my favorite stories in it. You've got The Mask of the Red Death, The Cask of Amontillado, and then Annabel Lee, that's a poem, The Bells, The Raven, and then you've got The Pit and Pendulum and The Telltale Heart. Now, those are the key Poe stories you want to have. So if you have a kid, I loved ghost stories when I was a kid, so I bought this for my daughter. She was 9 or 10 at the time, and I'm just going to say this in general about all of these, because the drawings in these do tend, in some cases, toward the somewhat gruesome. The Mask of the Red Death. I was shown in class an actual movie of The Mask of the Red Death, and this is actually probably a lot scarier than it. But that's what these stories were. They're about a heart cut a heart beating underneath the floorboards. They're about a guy being walled up alive and dying horribly in the catacombs beneath Venice. They're about a man in the Spanish Inquisition being tortured by the pendulum slowly coming down and the walls being heated. What I love about these is he doesn't pull any of the punches on the original stories. He tells them as the stories are. They are illustrated as the stories are. He doesn't overindulge in them. There is a certain amount of violence. People get their heads cut off in some of these, and you're going to see it. You'll even see someone holding up a head. So you have to make your own choices for your own kids, what they can handle. I happen to think kids can handle these sorts of things, especially in the context of a story. I mean, this is what the stories were for thousands and thousands of years. Life was a lot harder. It's nice that our life has gotten pleasanter, and that we don't have to deal with some of these harsh realities. But I think it's not the worst thing in the world to at least know that they existed and that they could still exist, and that you yourself might have to face some very scary circumstances. And stories give children a chance to enter into the world in a way that is a little safer. You know, I think of Don Bluth. He said, "You can scare kids all you want as long as good wins and you have a happy ending. Doesn't mean terrible things can't happen along the way." And so you get movies like The Land Before Time, a silly little movie about cutesy dinosaurs that opens with the main character's mother being horribly killed by a Tyrannosaurus. You know, that's the sort of thing yet. The Secret of Nim. My 8-year-old is a fairly sensitive child, and that is a fairly scary movie compared to a lot of modern animated movies. But she loved it because it gives the stories weight. It gives them meaning because there is real danger that the characters face. It's not like, to some degree, you have to trust the storyteller that things are going to be okay. And sometimes you have to trust that even when you know not everything is going to be okay. But the stakes are real. Miss Brisby in The Secret of Nim, I'll take some time to talk about it sometime. She is an ordinary person facing terrifying situations, terrifying realities that she would have no way of defeating, yet she meets them with courage. Her potential danger in that is not just to herself. She's already lost her husband. She stands to lose her entire family, to end her own life. She stands to lose everything. And she's afraid, as you would be. But through this story, you see the courage that carries her through those situations. Now, I happen to think there is actually, if you look at psychology, the way that you overcome phobias is not through avoidance. Avoiding the things that you fear does not teach you to become strong in them. It does not make you just develop into a perfectly strong person on your own. Avoidance only strengthens your fears, and it only makes you less and less adequate and less able to meet them. And the world needs you to be strong. Life is going to need you to be strong. Your future family is going to need you to be strong. Your future work is going to need you to be strong. And I think that begins in childhood with stories that we read that help you become strong, but they don't help you become strong by blowing sunshine up your butt, to put it in a vulgar sort of way. Like self-esteem, you can't just give that to someone. It's something that is produced, and it is produced much like overcoming phobias is produced by encountering difficulties and overcoming them, by meeting fears and surviving them through repeated repetitions of kinds of victories that build you up as a person. That's how you actually become a bigger and greater and stronger person. And that's something I've tried to do with my children, is not to say, "Oh, you're already great and you're already perfect." I would say, you got to be careful you say this. You're not as much as you could be, but there is so much that you could be. And you know what? I believe in that future you. I believe you have the capacities in you. I believe it is contained in you, but you have to walk the steps that will bring it out. You have to go through the journey that will make that a reality in you. I believe in the best version of you, the greatest version of you. And I think it's something you haven't already arrived at. I think it's something you're on a lifetime's journey toward, because it's something I'm still on a lifetime's journey for. I'm not this perfect, complete human being, not in the slightest way. I am on a lifelong journey of some big ups and some very serious downs, of uncovering and sculpting out and excavating the best, most capable version of me, and the version of me that is needed at whatever that moment in time is. And you want to help your children take on that journey. It's an adventure. That's why adventure stories are so much fun for kids, because you're discovering what you're capable of. But if you don't have any real challenges to meet, if you never encounter anything bigger than you or scarier than you, there is no growth. You know, you're depriving them of the opportunity for growth. You're depriving them of a larger world that they could confront and that they could handle. And so use your own wisdom with your children. I thought that my oldest could handle these stories. that she could handle the world. And it turned out I was right. As I said, I enjoyed ghost stories. I've always enjoyed Poe ever since I was a little kid. Particularly, I don't like horror, but I always liked the atmosphere of your early American Gothic stories, and especially Poe. And his poetry is very nice, and it really makes you think too. And it's well written. It's good art. This is all of these. These are great art. This is the sort of stuff you want to expose your children to. Maybe be a little careful about this one. It just might not be every kid's taste. So next, I want to talk about Beowulf. Now, Beowulf is in many ways the simplest one, in that it is mostly pictures and not a lot of talking. And it's harder to preserve the language from Beowulf because of when it was written. I mean, we're literally talking like the oldest story in the English literature canon. I've always enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun story. I like that he includes not just the defeat of Grendel, but the defeat of Grendel's mother, and on to the bits with the sea serpents and the dragon and the whole story. And this one is particularly violent because it is from that era. This is the story of the great, sort of warriors fighting monsters in this sort of legendary time. But the art in it is great. And Grendel in particular is rather horrible. Here you get a look at him. Very interesting interpretation of Grendel as a monster, as a giant, as something kind of inhuman. And he does, eat people. And Beowulf does rip his arm off and beat him with it. Essentially, it's this is a page after page of action, and you just have to kind of follow it. It doesn't lead you through it. In some ways, I'd say narratively, it's a little weaker, just because it is almost just like passing images. But if you have a kid who really enjoys your action comics and stuff, well, this is a great one. There's a lot to look at, and I'll also be honest. I love the ending of this book. That's where there is finally a little more talking. Where that's the great thing about the reality of these old stories, and the fact that they don't hide things from you. They don't just show you Beowulf defeating Grendel and then that's it. It's like, well, you defeated Grendel, but now there's some other problem you have to solve. Okay, now you solved that problem. It's like, all right, you got the honor, you went home, you led your people, you do all these things, but there's a point at which, time has passed. You're getting old, you're getting weak, the old enemies are gathering again, and you won't necessarily be around to do anything about it. And I just want to read you a couple passages, and this shows what I mean, how he's managed to take some of the more thoughtful bits from the original work and still keep them inside of here. So this is the king saying farewell to Beowulf, Hrothgar. Wondrous it seems when Almighty God gives a man fortune and fame and a wide dominion, power over great parts of the earth. So if you imagine this is like a comic book movie, this is when the hero has just won and he's saying his the big good work where we're end of the movie. You get ready to roll credits. And this is the speech that the hero gets from the sort of elder figure at the end of this of that great epic story. But ever it comes, power over great parts of the earth, an empire so ample he can comprehend no end to it. But ever it comes that the frame of the body fragile yield, faded falls, and there follows another who joyously the jewels divides, the royal riches, and cares not for his predecessor. Take thou therefore good heed, O Beowulf, against pride and arrogance. Choose the better path, profit eternal. Now indeed thou art in the pride of thy strength and the power of thy youth. But there will come of a surety, sooner or later, either sickness or the sword. Fire shall consume thee, or the flood swallow thee up, be it bite of blade, or brandish spear, or odious age, or the eye's clear beam grown dull and leaden. Come in what shape it may, death will subdue even thee, thou hero of war. And that's it. That's his final speech. Imagine someone saying that to Thor or Tony Stark at the end of a Marvel movie, and then saying, okay, now here's your reward, go off. What an interesting thing to include. And of course, the story doesn't stop there. You get into a bit with the dragon and the thief who steals a cup, where you can see the influences that help shape The Hobbit. And at this time, when we find Beowulf, he has grown old and weak. This great hero, the greatest of heroes, divine in his strength. He says, "I'm an old man. I don't have everything that I used to have. Hold thou earth, since heroes may not the wealth of kings. Ever from thee brave men bought it, but battle death seized them, killing my clansmen all, robbing them of life and of a liegeman's joys. They are gone, my noble comrades, and only I am left alive." So you also see the fading. You see that fading is part of this story, and also an uncertain future. Beowulf does go fight the dragon. I really like the design of the dragon in this book, and he does say a farewell where he says, "50 years have I watched well over my people, nor has any ruler of the nations round about dared to cross my borders with hostile purpose. I have meted out judgment and justice, feuds I sought not, nor falsely swore ever on oath. For all these things, though mortally wounded, glad am I. No sin shall keep me from the heavenly company of my forebears." And then he talks about how, well, now that they know I'm gone, it's possible that our old enemies, like the Franks and the Frisians, and I might be related to the Frisians myself, actually, may come and put an end to them. And he dies, but he also provides some inspiration to his people that he is leaving behind, but they realize they have to fight their own fights in the time that is to come. Like I'm saying, I really like that the whole story is in there, including the bittersweet ending. So now let's get into these two Shakespearean ones that I have, Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth. So these are both good. What I would say about Romeo and Juliet, this is a little harder one to read. I feel like the adaptation is just a little trickier. The language is a little trickier. It really helps if you already know the story. My daughter, this was the one, she had a harder time following both of these, the Shakespearean ones. And maybe it just has to do with the way that he did the writing. It's a little harder to follow. But if you know the story, it's actually great. It's fun. He gives us a slightly different version where I think she's like Indian in this story, and he's black. And but it's, the story itself isn't changed. It's just that's what they look like in Pamplona, or no, Verona. And it's actually very well done. It actually is a nice, short, easy way to do the story. And when I got to the very end of it, it was tragic. It did bring tears to my eyes reading it. This is a tragic and powerful story. And it is also tragic and powerful because he doesn't just focus on the people, but on, the meaning of it for the people around them, and how hard the friar tried to make things work out, and how much he was trying to use it to bring peace between these two families whose feuding was just tearing the city apart. And the prince, you get his sort of famous declamation at the end of it, where he's just like, "Look what your feuding has cost everyone." Like, he thought, he realized he has actually paid the price for ignoring it. He says, "Where be these enemies? Capulet, Montague, see what a scourge is laid upon your hate." A scourge is like a whip used for punishment. So he's saying this is a punishment, a divine punishment, or a punishment. True divine punishments are encapsulated. They are natural to the thing. They are produced out of the thing that makes them. So anyway, "See what a scourge is laid upon your hate. The heaven finds means to kill your joys with love. And I, for winking at your discords too, have lost a brace of kinsmen. All are punished." And I like that. You see the way that they're affected by that. They realize their own love and love itself has been used and turned, because of their hate, into something to steal their dearest joys. And that the prince himself has failed. He says, "Because I winked at it." He means because I was just like, whatever, I won't do that much. I won't get too involved. I'm not going to directly confront this. It's not too big a problem. Let them, it's their problem. And then he says, "Aha, because I winked at it, I have lost. because he lost some of his own dear kinsmen in the previous scene. Which, let's see, it's unfortunate how that happens. So here's the prince's kinsman getting killed by Romeo. It is a sad story, but it's also a story that does have some real pathos to it, some real meaning to it. The characters, I mean, Shakespeare wrote them. They're brilliant. They're imperfect. Romeo tries himself to change and be peaceful and do things differently and not get into a fight with Juliet's family. And it just doesn't work out. And then he can't keep his temper and his youthful passion. And next thing he knows, he's killed Juliet's cousin, is himself on the run. It's a classic story. It's a great story. If you want a nice, easy, short intro to this story, this is a great one. But like I said, it's not as accessible as it could be because for some reason it's just a little more challenging to read. I feel like it would help a younger reader to already have maybe even just seen a movie of it. Have some idea of what's going on so they can follow it. Because it is, for some reason, just a little harder to follow what's going on. It's not spelled out enough for you. And I think partly it's because he is just using the imagery. You have to actually look at the pictures to keep track of what's going on. And then the things people are saying, which isn't necessarily being narrated to you in the story. You're just seeing it happen and you're kind of following along with it. Now, Macbeth, this is a great one. I love this one. I think this is an excellent adaptation of Macbeth and a wonderful way to access it. And if you have not read Macbeth, you don't feel like you have the patience to read Macbeth, read this. This is a great version of Macbeth. It gives you the story, gives you a lot of the basic, all the basic things that happen in it. I like the way it portrays it. The art is fantastic. The back and forth, the intrigue. It's a very exciting story. Also in here, there's another Tolkien inspiration. There's a bit where they come with the wood. And what it is, it's the army from England. And what they've done is they've cut branches from the wood, and there's this prophecy that Macbeth won't be defeated until the forest itself comes for him, and he thinks, oh, well, that's never going to happen. And then it looks like it has, but it's actually just people holding branches. And Tolkien said when he read that, he was always very disappointed that it wasn't actually the wood itself in rebellion. He liked the idea of nature itself rebelling against the unjust rule of Macbeth. So he used the Ents as a way to include that in his own story. And that is a theme that you see in Shakespearean things and medieval ideology. Even if you go to another Shakespearean adaptation, The Lion King. In The Lion King, it's as if nature itself rebels against the mismanagement of Scar. Scar's, it's not just that Scar himself is a jerk, his kingship itself is an affront to the natural order. It's a distortion. He's ruining everything. It flows from the top down. He's just wrecking everything. And so it symbolically brings ruin to the whole land. And it's when the proper king takes his place, it wasn't something he sought for its own sake, like Scar did, but ended up seeking as this is the duty, maintaining the balance, the peace of the land, the duty of the king to the kingdom. It's when the true king takes that place, who understands that things go back to peace and harmony and plenty. And so that's symbolized through light and darkness, the parching of the land, the fleeing of the herds, and then the return of life and growth. But Tolkien liked that idea of nature itself being in rebellion against an unjust king. Now, there are some seriously gory elements in this book, because this is a book about murder, like multiple murder, and people thinking about murder, and people seeing visions of the people they have murdered, and people murdering other people's families. It is a dark and horrific story, and finally come back and Macbeth getting his proper vengeance meted out upon him. That's the only one that's maybe a little extreme, because of course you wouldn't have, that's how Macbeth ends. He has it coming by that point. But it really covers the psychological elements, how Macbeth gets dragged into doing something like that, his own weakness of character, the ways that people manipulate each other, his relationship with his wife, his own relationship with the witches and the prophecies, and how much or how should he act or not act. It's a great story, and the language is preserved very well. And you have some of those famous lines. There's so many famous lines in Macbeth that you probably heard somewhere, like, screw your scourge to the sticking place and will not fail. That's a famous line, and there's so many from Macbeth. And really, Gareth Hinds has done an excellent job of making sure to preserve each one of those lines and in the context. So even if you never get around to reading the whole book, you'll at least see what the context was of them in here. And also, if you're someone who enjoys Donald Duck and has enjoyed the Donald Duck cartoon or the Carl Sparks book with the witch, the Halloween one, she does the double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. This is the real thing, kids, right out of Shakespeare. And it is right out of Shakespeare. There's the witches doing it. So this will give you a chance to connect to that bit of your cultural history. So fantastic one. This is actually one of my favorites. This might be my number 2 recommendation if you were going to pick any of these up. My daughter was able to read this one easily. She just read it in the car while we were doing a short drive, only like an hour's drive. She read it in less time than that. She read it. My daughter's read Macbeth. She's read a lot of the original language. She did not have a hard time following this one. Well, she did a little bit. The political intrigue is a little complicated, and it's a little complicated if you don't have the historical context of understanding what kingdom is this, where did this person flee to, why do these people want to come back and do that, who is the enemies, why is Macbeth after this guy. It's a little hard to keep track of, but you know what? It's still a great introduction to it. And if you're a little older, I don't think, older than 10, I mean, you probably won't have any trouble keeping track of it. It's really fun, and it's classical literature. So now we'll get into the 2 big ones, the Iliad and the Odyssey. These are thick, these are heavy, and I just want to say my number 1 pick, if you were to buy one of these, the Odyssey. This is fantastic. The first one I got. Now, the Iliad is also great. Now, the Iliad, of course, I studied Greek philosophy a lot, and the truth is the Iliad is an amazing book because it's like the whole Greek culture just wrapped up into a story, and that's what it's meant to be. It's telling you about their culture. It's telling you about the structure of their culture. It's telling you about their different jobs that people did, the different types of rites that they had, traditions, religious rites, their pantheons of gods and values, like so much of it. It's all in here. This is kind of your Greek version of the Bible. It's all in here. It's all in this wonderful story. So you learn so much from it, but this is a big book and there is a lot in it. And although it's written amazingly, if you read the original one, it is challenging too. Not everyone's used to reading that kind of literature. So if you want kind of an Iliad light, this is a very respectable version of the Iliad light that you can actually get through in a much more reasonable amount of time. So a wonderful introduction to it. And he has some tricks that really help you. I love the way he's captured the art and the things of the period. One great thing he does is he does have, he shows you the cast so you know who everybody is. He shows you the layout of the area. He's got a map in here so you always know where you are and where things are. But he has some other things. He's got the gods, and he color-coded them, basically, so you can tell the gods apart by their color. And it's fairly straightforward. So that even in circumstances where you're like, is that meant to be Athena? You're like, oh yeah, it's dark blue. Athena's always dark blue. I can recognize her. And same thing, he worked in some very clever details to the armor of the people, where he actually worked the first letter of their name into their outfits. And he gave them very distinct outfits and also very distinct shields. and gear so you can tell the difference between them, because it can get very confusing. The Iliad contains an insane number of characters, and I really like his Achilles. His Achilles is fantastic, and he really captures this part of the story. And it isn't a story of immense drama. I feel like there's a bits in the middle where it gets a bit bogged down, but that's sort of like the story too, where everyone's just sort of going back and forth and fighting, back and forth and fighting. And it's a huge amount of lists of names and who's there and which people they brought and how many people they brought. But, you get through it so easily in this adaptation. Now, in this book, I particularly love how he preserves the mourning of Andromache, because it's a very human story in some ways. It's hard to say whether Hector or Achilles is the hero. I guess most straightforwardly, we would think that Hector was the hero, although he loses, and Achilles wins, but Achilles also loses. And because Achilles knows that if he defeats Hector, he'll die. And it was not his intention to fight Hector. It was his intention to sail home and basically end up living a quiet life. He's given a prophecy that very clearly says, you can fight and kill Hector and you will be known for all time, but you will die here far from home and never see your family again. And he's just like, that doesn't sound great. And they say, well, or you can just not fight. Hector lives, and you will live a long and peaceful life and die happy, but not famous, just at home with those you care about. And for a long time, that's what his intent is. But finally, he's driven in his rage against the king and his rage against the accident that results in the killing of his cousin to just cast aside his own self-interest and go to his own death, which he knows follows him soon after the killing of Hector. And even when Hector is dying, he tells Achilles, you know what this means. This is the end for you too. And that just sort of fuels Achilles' rage even more, and he digs even deeper into it. But I love that so much of the language is preserved. Here you've got Andromache, the wife of Hector, and there's some wonderful images woven into it. And these images are the future that isn't actually covered. And it's the Trojan horse and the burning of Troy and her being led away in chains. If you're worried about how that turned out, Andromache is eventually Aeneas escapes, and he goes and rescues Andromache, and then according to the Aeneid, they go off and they found Rome. But she has this wonderful morning speech, which I will read. Oh, Hector, here's my desolation. You and I were born under the same unhappy star, you in Priam's house, and I in the house of Aetion, unlucky father of an unlucky child who wishes now she'd never been born. Now that you go down to the house of death, deep below the earth, leaving me to waste away in grief, a widow. And what of our son, no more than a baby? What help can you give him now? Even if he escapes the wrenching horrors of war, pain and labor will plague him all his days to come. Strangers will divvy up his lands. Other boys will shun him. He'll go in hunger to his father's friends to beg for food, and one may let him sip from a cup enough to wet his lips, but not to quench his thirst. And then some bully will beat him from the banquet, fists and insults flying. And you will be devoured by dogs, by worms lying naked in the earth. Oh, there are folded garments in your chambers, delicate and fine, of woman's weaving, but they are no use to you now. By heaven, I'll burn them to the last thread. They cannot cover you in death, so let them all be burned in your honor. So there's a lot of drama in here, and you see both sides of the human drama. You see the sadness of Achilles over his cousin. You see the sadness of Andromache over the death of Hector. As much as they're fighting these wars, it's not like they're unaware of the tragedy of them. In fact, they rail against them, and they often are just like, why do the gods torment us in this way? Why must it be so? This is terrible. And you get this meeting, of course, eventually between Priam and Achilles himself, which is a very moving scene. And I'm not crazy about it, but if you watch the movie Troy, they did preserve that scene in it too, where Priam goes and clasps the knees of the man who killed his son. Not just Hector either. Priam has lost so much, and he appeals to Achilles, and he says, "This is the." Says, "Fear the gods, Achilles, and be merciful to me, remembering your own father. Think me more pitiful by far, since I have put to my lips the hand of the man who killed my son." And Achilles weeps and changes his mind and gives back the body of Hector. It's this wonderful human story. And if you're not familiar with it, it pretty much ends there. That's pretty much the end of the Iliad, because it really just covers this bit of from when Achilles gets angry and stops fighting to when he gives back the body of Hector. Excellent book. You should definitely read it. You should definitely get it. It does contain quite a lot of craziness, quite a lot of violence. He doesn't try to hide any of it from you. He just said, here's the story. There's a reason. It has been so powerful for so many thousands of years. And this is an epic tale that carries you along with it. Life, death, pain, joy, children, parents. It's fantastic. It's a fantastic book. Now, the Odyssey will be a little easier to read for a lot of people because this is much closer to a more conventional, like, novel story for us. Instead of just being this giant historical and anthropological document, the Odyssey is more like one man's crazy journey of adventures. All the crazy stuff that happens to Odysseus. All he wants to do is get home. He never wanted to leave in the first place. He just wanted to stay with his wife and his son, and he ends up getting roped into coming along. Never wanted to, but it happens, and he just wants to get back. And so many things get in his way. And meanwhile, his son and his wife are trying to hold out, even though he's been gone for years, and people think, oh, he's never coming back. So like, okay, so his wife should marry someone else, and then they will rule. And so everyone is just like, you got to pick someone. Why are you waiting for years and years for the king to come back? He's not coming back. Just pick a new consort. And of course, Odysseus' son is in terrible danger then. And bit by bit, he does make his way home through all sorts of crazy adventures. And finally, then he has to kind of sneak in because his house is basically occupied territory. It's been taken over by these suitors, these jackals that want to steal the kingship, steal his wife, dispose of his son. And he first has to connect with his son and then find, well, who are the loyal servants? And he finds like the guy who used to, I think he managed the stables or was the shepherd, and gets these old people and gets in touch with the old nursemaid who's like, I can give you the inside information. Athena helps him disguise himself. That's his patron goddess through the whole thing. And then finally they have the battle to retake the house, which is not a unviolent affair. It's one of the most violent parts of the book. And it gives you an insight into that time period and how things work there. And then, of course, I also like, and this is very in keeping with the truth of the story, it's not like that's the end of it. Then the people who were the relatives of the people he killed to take back his house come to fight him, and then they're all going to kill each other, and him and his dad get a little overexcited. But then Athena steps in and says, hey, no, let's have peace. And so you actually get a complete story with a happy ending, and you step into it at the beginning, and then some of it's told through flashbacks. So it's very well structured. It is this epic story. It has become the pattern story for so many other stories we read. And this one really works. The language in it is readable. This is, I think this is the first one my daughter read, and she found it very readable. Same thing. She just sat down in the car and just read her way through it in a fairly, not too long amount of time. She's like, oh, I just read the Odyssey. I was like, yeah, you did just read the Odyssey, and it still has a lot of the wonderful language in it, and it has these characters and stories that you're familiar with, and here they are. This is it. This is what they're from. And so she really enjoyed that, and it enriched things. As I said, it does contain violence. It also contains a certain amount of nudity, not extreme, but there is a certain amount of it. It's the world of the ancient Greeks, and he's just trying to give you the story in a way that I feel is just presenting it as it is, to bring you into that story. And so for me, that's all worth it. I think kids can handle it. I think this is one of the great works of literature of all time, and it's worth entering into it and seeing something of the world then and the people. So give it a chance. This is, as I said, my number one recommendation. One passage I do want to mention from this, because it's one of the very interesting passages from this story. There's a lot of reflection that happens in this story about fate and life and why things are the way they are. There's a bit in the middle where Odysseus visits the spirits of the dead, and he actually talks to his mother. He finds out his mother has died, and talks to them. And he's on his way home from the Trojan War, and he basically meets virtually all the heroes from the Trojan War are dead and are in Hades. And that is an interesting thing to happen. It's like, I'm just on my way home from this big victorious war, the greatest war ever fought. And it turns out Ajax is already dead. And it turns out Achilles is dead. And it's Agamemnon went home and got murdered. Like things didn't turn out great for everybody. And he talks to Achilles, and as Achilles comes, the greatest hero of all, even the dead bow before him, and he says, "Oh, great Achilles, how fortunate are you, godlike in life, and even among ghosts you stand lord over all." And Achilles says, "Flattering words as always, Odysseus, but spare me your praise of death. You don't know what it's like on this side. I'd rather be plowing a furrow or the lowest servant in some peasant king's employ than a lord among these empty souls." And that is what happens. Odysseus meets Achilles and is like, "Wow, how awesome you were. And even in death, you're the greatest." And Achilles is just like, yeah, it's pretty great. Pretty great, all right. And so it's funny because within this story, you have this retrospective on the fleetingness of the victory of the war that they just spent 10 years fighting, and how virtually none of them made it home. And only Odysseus, the wisest, is the one that does make it home. And even for him, it's a long and hard journey. And he sees the kind of sad ends and fate that came to the other of the great heroes and warriors, which does just reinforce his desire. I've got to get home to Penelope. And if you know about the story between Odysseus and his wife, that's also a great story. And his choice of her is used as one of the early examples of how Odysseus was the wisest, because everyone had come to seek Helen's hand, and everyone's super excited about Helen because she's so beautiful. And Odysseus is just like, no, that is danger, that is disaster, that is more trouble than it's worth. Don't be taken in by the beauty. And he looks and he sees, there is the wisest one, there is the smartest one, there's the most graceful one, there is the best one. And so he just says to Helen's father, he's like, if you'll consider me to marry this person, I can help you figure out how to handle the whole marriage of Helen in a way where everyone won't end up killing each other, and where they won't try to murder each other to take each other's places. Now, unfortunately, it's that scheme that actually kind of results in the Trojan War, because Odysseus is smart enough to know that, in fact, Helen will just choose the handsomest. He knows that just like they're being shallow, he knows that she's shallow and all she cares about is looks. And he knows whatever they do, she's just going to pick Menelaus because he's the best looking. And those two will sort of deserve each other. But he gets everyone to make this pact to respect and protect and honor the marriage of whoever does it. And it's unfortunately that pact that ends up being used to drag him and everyone else into the Trojan War. So he's kind of hoisted by his own petard and destroyed by his own cleverness. But he does finally get home to his wife and son, and they are finally reunited, and you really feel how happy a reunion that is, and how faithfully they sought each other and waited for each other through the years, and how glad they are to finally come back together again. Even though he's gone from this young, handsome, blonde guy, he's kind of become an old man. Anyway, great story. You get the Cyclops in there, you get Circe getting turned into pigs, Scylla and Charybdis, the sirens, all of these things, they're just part of the landscape of our literature, and you should definitely have some background in them. So even if you never get around to tackling the whole thing, anyone who just wants to understand and enjoy the stories that we watch, because this story has been redone again and again and again, and the literary references, so many of the monsters and creatures and strange places and strange things that we encounter in the adventure stories today find an origin in this. So this is such an approachable way to go back and actually get into that story, dip into it, either as the first time as a young person, or as a fun way to return to the story if you've actually read the original, or if you feel like you don't have time for that, get the easy version. Anyway, that's my review of all these books. They're wonderful. The art in them, I haven't said too much about the art, but the art is just incredible. It's wonderful. It's full of depth. It's full of detail. It's full of wonderful historical detail. Even little things, which I really appreciate, like where they show the palace of Odysseus. That's it. That's the palace of Odysseus. It's very actually much more accurate. Maybe you're thinking of something more fantastic, this vast giant thing. It's like, no, we're talking about the Bronze Age. That's a Bronze Age palace for a small city-state like Ithaca, So I really appreciate that he has put in some real work in these books. It's a real labor of love, trying to really bring these stories to you in as faithful a way as possible. It is so hard to find someone who's willing to do that, who's willing to truly just trust the material and try to serve the material and bring it to you in the best and most effective way possible. That is what I truly love about these books. That is what I truly love about Gareth Hinds as an author. And so this has my wholehearted recommendation, especially if you're a love of literature and especially Greek mythology, classical literature. You should go out and get it. That's all for today. See you next time.